The phone rang at 2:01 a.m. on a Tuesday night in October, cutting through the silence of our bedroom like a blade through fabric. Naomi stirred beside me but didn't wake. She'd been working late again at the tech startup where she managed HR, the third time this week. I'd stopped asking questions about her schedule months ago, mostly because I didn't want to hear the answers. I'm Daniel Farrow, 42 years old, facilities manager at the local college here in Millbrook, Maine. I fix broken pipes, replace burnt-out bulbs, and make sure the heating systems don't fail during the brutal winters. It's honest work that keeps my hands busy and my mind sharp. What it doesn't do is prepare you for the moment your entire life implodes. The phone kept ringing. Naomi's iPhone, not mine. The screen glowed bright in the darkness, showing a contact name that made my stomach clench. Scott Mercer. My best friend since college. The guy who'd been my best man, who knew where I kept my spare key, who'd helped me install the new deck last summer. Naomi still didn't wake up. Strange, considering she usually jumped at every notification, every buzz, every ping from that device. But here she was, sleeping like someone who'd taken something to help her rest, or someone who was expecting the call to go to voicemail. I picked up the phone and swiped to answer. "Hello," I said quietly, keeping my voice steady. There was a pause, then Scott's voice, casual as if he were calling to discuss weekend plans. "She's sleeping." In the background, clear as crystal, I heard her laugh, Naomi's laugh. The same one I'd fallen in love with 15 years ago, the same one that used to make me smile when she found something funny on her laptop while we watched movies together. Except now, she was supposed to be unconscious beside me, and that laugh was coming through a phone connection from wherever Scott was calling. My mind processed this information with the same methodical approach I used when diagnosing a malfunctioning boiler. Step 1. Identify the problem. Step 2. Assess the damage. Step 3. Plan the repair. Except some things can't be repaired. Some things need to be replaced entirely. "Keep her warm," I replied, my voice calm as morning coffee. I hung up and set the phone back on Naomi's nightstand. Then I lay there in the darkness, listening to her breathe, watching the digital clock count minutes while I planned what came next. At 2:15 a.m., I slipped out of bed and went downstairs to my workshop. The basement was my sanctuary, filled with tools, spare parts, and the kind of organized chaos that made sense to me. I found Earl Gentry's business card in my desk drawer. Earl had been the town locksmith for 30 years, and he'd mentioned more than once that emergency calls paid double rates. I dialed his number. "Earl, it's Daniel Farrow. I need you to change every lock on my house tonight. Cash payment, and I'll throw in a $500 bonus if you can keep this between us." Earl's gravelly voice was alert despite the hour. "That's quite the emergency, Daniel. Everything all right?" "Everything's about to be. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Next, I opened my laptop and pulled up our phone records. Verizon's website made it easy to download detailed call logs going back 6 months. What I found there painted a picture clearer than any confession. Dozens of calls between Naomi and Scott, often lasting hours, frequently occurring during times when she'd told me she was in meetings or working late. The pattern went back 4 months. 4 months of lies, 4 months of late nights at the office and weekend team-building events, and conference calls with the West Coast team. I printed everything: call logs, text message timestamps, data usage reports. Then I pulled up Naomi's calendar, the one she'd carelessly left logged in on our shared computer. Her real calendar, not the sanitized version she showed me when I asked about her schedule. Today, technically, she had a lunch meeting with Scott, blocked out from noon to 3 p.m. Last week there'd been a strategy session that coincidentally aligned with Scott's day off from his IT job at the same company where Naomi worked. The week before that, a team dinner on the same night, Scott had told his wife Alison that he was visiting his sick mother in Portland. I gathered all the evidence into a folder, both digital and physical copies. Then I sat back and considered my next move. Scott Mercer, had been my friend for 20 years. We'd met in college, bonded over late-night study sessions and cheap drinks. He'd introduced me to Alison, a sweet woman who taught third grade and deserved better than what she was about to discover. They had 2 kids, Emma, 8, and Tyler, 6. Good kids who called me Uncle Daniel and always wanted to hear stories about the weird things I found in the college dorms. Alison deserved to know. More than that, she deserved to know before anyone else started talking. In a town like Millbrook, secrets had a way of becoming public knowledge faster than snow melted in spring. I picked up my phone and composed a text message. Alison, this is Daniel. I need you to check Scott's phone records tonight. Call me when you do. I have information you need to see. I stared at the message for a long moment, my thumb hovering over the send button. Once I pressed it, there would be no going back. No pretending I hadn't heard what I'd heard, no hoping for some innocent explanation. But there wasn't an innocent explanation. Not for that laugh in the background, not for Scott answering Naomi's phone like he had every right to be wherever she was at 2 a.m. I hit send. Outside, I heard Earl's van pulling into the driveway. I went upstairs and let him in through the back door, explaining that I needed complete discretion and that my wife was sleeping. Earl, bless him, asked no questions beyond what type of locks I wanted and whether I needed new keys cut. Make it 4 sets, I told him. I'll need extras. While Earl worked, I went back to my workshop and continued gathering evidence. I found the credit card statements I'd been meaning to review, the ones that showed charges at restaurants I'd never been to, hotels in towns where Naomi claimed to have no business meetings, gas purchases that didn't match her supposed work schedule. The picture became clearer with each document. This wasn't a recent development or a momentary lapse in judgment. This was a systematic deception, carefully planned and executed over months. At 4:30 a.m., Earl finished installing new deadbolts and handle locks on every door: front door, back door, side entrance, garage door. He handed me the keys and accepted his payment in cash. Pleasure doing business with you, Daniel. You call if you need anything else. After he left, I made coffee and sat at my kitchen table, watching the sunrise paint the sky orange and pink through the window. In a few hours, Naomi would come home expecting to walk through that front door like she owned the place. Instead, she'd find her suitcase waiting on the porch and a very different version of her husband sitting inside. My phone buzzed. A text from Alison. Oh my God, Daniel. We need to talk. I'm coming over as soon as I drop the kids at school, I replied. I'll be here. Bring coffee. We're going to need it. At 6:45 a.m., I heard a car in the driveway. Naomi's Honda Civic, returning from whatever story she'd tell about where she'd been all night. I watched through the window as she got out, looking rumpled but satisfied, checking her phone as she walked toward the front door. She tried her key. It didn't work. She tried it again, then tried the back door, then the side entrance. Finally, she knocked. I opened the door, but didn't invite her in. Morning, Naomi. Sleep well? Her face cycled through confusion, irritation, and the beginning of panic. Daniel, what's wrong with the locks? Did something happen? You could say that. I held up her suitcase, the one I'd packed while Earl changed the locks. I believe this belongs to you. What are you talking about? Let me in. I need to shower and change for work. About that, I said, pulling out the folder of evidence. I think your work schedule might be changing soon. I saw the exact moment she realized what I knew. Her face went pale, and her mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. Scott says hello, by the way. Interesting conversation we had at 2 a.m. Behind her, another car pulled into the driveway. Allison's blue Toyota, arriving exactly when she'd promised. She got out holding 2 coffee cups and a manila envelope that I suspected contained Scott's phone records. Naomi turned to see Alison approaching, and I watched the last of her composure crumble. Ladies, I said, stepping aside to let Alison onto the porch. I believe you two have some things to discuss. Alison Mercer looked like she hadn't slept since receiving my text. Her usually neat brown hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and her eyes were red-rimmed behind her wire-frame glasses. She taught 3rd grade at Millbrook Elementary and had the kind of patient demeanor that came from managing 28 eight-year-olds every day. But patience had its limits, and from the way she clutched that manila envelope, I could tell she'd reached hers. "Hello, Naomi," Alison said, her voice carrying the same tone she probably used when catching students cheating on spelling tests. Naomi stood frozen on my porch, still holding her purse, still trying to process how her carefully constructed world had collapsed in the space of 6 hours. "Alison, I can explain." "Can you?" Alison interrupted. "Because I spent the last 3 hours going through Scott's phone records, and I'm very curious to hear your explanation for 4 months of daily phone calls, including one that lasted 3 hours last Tuesday, when he told me he was at a work training seminar." I gestured toward the porch chairs. "Why don't we all sit down? I made coffee." "I'm not sitting anywhere," Naomi snapped, finally finding her voice. "Daniel, this is ridiculous. You changed the locks because of a phone call. Scott was probably drunk and confused. You know how he gets when he's been drinking." "Actually," I said, settling into my favorite wicker chair, "Scott sounded perfectly sober, clear-headed even, like someone who was very comfortable answering your phone at 2 a.m. Alison sat down and opened her envelope. "Daniel, before we go any further, I need to show you something." She pulled out several printed pages. "These are Scott's text messages from the past month. I think you should read them." She handed me the papers, and I scanned the first page. What I found there was worse than I'd expected. Not just evidence of an affair, but detailed planning. Discussions about when I'd be at work, when Alison would be busy with the kids, which hotels offered the best rates for afternoon stays. "Listen to this one," I said, reading aloud. "From Scott to Naomi, last Thursday. Daniel's working the overnight shift at the college. Come over after Alison falls asleep. I'll leave the garage door cracked." Naomi's face went from pale to green. "You have no right to read private messages." "Private?" Alison stood up, her teacher voice shifting into full authority mode. "These messages involve my husband, my marriage, and my children's father. I have every right to know what he's been doing behind my back." "And these," I continued, flipping through more pages, "are from your phone, Naomi, courtesy of our shared cell plan that sends me copies of all text message logs." I found a particularly damning exchange. Here's a good one. "Daniel suspects something. We need to be more careful. Maybe we should cool it for a while." And Scott's response, "Don't worry about Daniel. He's too trusting to figure it out." The sound that came from Naomi's throat was somewhere between a gasp and a whimper. "Too trusting," I repeated, setting the papers down. "That's what my best friend thought of me. Too trusting to figure out that my wife was spending her lunch breaks in hotel rooms, and my best friend was using my house key to sneak around when I wasn't home." Alison was crying now, quiet tears that she wiped away with the back of her hand. "How long, Naomi? How long has this been going on?" "It's not what you think." 4 months, I answered for her. "Based on the phone records, it started in June. Remember that weekend you went to that women's leadership conference in Portland, Naomi? The one where you said you needed to focus on professional development?" Naomi finally sat down, collapsing into the remaining chair like her legs couldn't support her anymore. "Daniel, please, can we talk about this privately?" "Privacy?" I laughed, but there was no humor in it. That's rich, coming from someone who's been conducting her private business in my bed. "That never happened," she said quickly. "We never, not in our house." "Oh, well, that makes it so much better." I pulled out another document from my folder. Hotel receipts. Charged to the credit card that I pay every month. The Millbrook Inn, the Portland Harbor Hotel, even that little bed and breakfast in Camden that we went to for our anniversary 3 years ago. Alison made a small, wounded sound. "The Camden place? Scott took me there for our 10th anniversary. He said it was special to him. Apparently, it was special to him and Naomi, too, I said. They were there 2 weeks ago. Same room we stayed in, if the receipt is accurate. My phone rang. I glanced at the screen and saw Scott's name. Perfect timing. Should I answer? I asked, looking between the two women. Maybe he wants to explain himself. Put it on speaker, Alison said, her voice hard as winter ground. I accepted the call and activated the speaker. Morning, Scott. Daniel, man, we need to talk. I think there's been some kind of misunderstanding. Really? What kind of misunderstanding? Look, I was drunk last night. I don't even remember answering Naomi's phone. I must have grabbed the wrong one when it rang. You know how it is when you've had a few too many. Where are you right now, Scott? There was a pause. I'm at home. Where else would I be? That's interesting, Alison said, speaking directly into the phone. Because I'm looking at our home right now, and your car isn't here. It hasn't been here all night. The silence stretched long enough that I thought the call had dropped. Alison? Scott's voice was smaller now, uncertain. Yes, Scott. It's me. Your wife. The one you told was going to your mother's house last night. Except I called your mother this morning, and she hasn't seen you in 2 weeks. I can explain. I'm sure you can, I interrupted. You're good at explanations. Like how you explained that work training seminar that lasted 3 hours on Tuesday. The one that Naomi also attended, apparently, since she was unreachable during the exact same time period. Another long silence. Where are you, Scott? Alison asked again. I'm at the Millbrook Inn. The admission hung in the air like smoke from a house fire. Are you alone? She pressed. Alison, please. Are you alone? No. Naomi buried her face in her hands. I see, Alison said, her voice steady despite the tears still flowing. And how long were you planning to keep this going? It's not what you think. It just happened. We didn't plan it. I picked up the hotel receipts again. 4 months of it just happened, Scott? 4 months of carefully planned hotel stays and coordinated schedules and lies to both our families? Daniel, you have to understand. What I understand, I said, my voice rising for the first time, is that my best friend and my wife have been treating me like an idiot for 4 months. What I understand is that you've been using my house, my trust, and my friendship to carry on an affair behind my back. It wasn't supposed to go this far. How far was it supposed to go? Alison asked. Were you planning to tell me eventually? Were you going to ask for a divorce? Or were you just going to keep lying until someone caught you? We were going to tell you both. We just needed time to figure out how. Time? I stood up, pacing to the porch railing. You needed time? You've had 4 months. How much time do you need to decide that you want to destroy 2 marriages and hurt 2 families? That's not what we wanted. Then what did you want? Naomi finally spoke, looking up from her hands. What was the end game here, Scott? The question seemed to surprise him. We thought maybe if things changed. If things changed how? Alison pressed. If Daniel and I just disappeared? If we made it easy for you by walking away? No, because that's not going to happen, I said, cutting him off. I'm not walking away from my house, my life, or my reputation because you two couldn't keep your hands off each other. Daniel, Naomi tried again, if we could just talk. We are talking. All 4 of us. No more private conversations, no more secret meetings. Everything's out in the open now. I sat back down and looked at both women. Alison was still crying, but had that determined set to her jaw that meant she was moving from shock to action. Naomi looked like she was about to be sick. So, here's what's going to happen, I continued. Naomi, you're not coming back into this house. Your things will be packed and ready for pickup by this afternoon. Alison, I assume you'll be making your own arrangements regarding Scott. He's not coming home, Alison said firmly. I'm changing the locks today. Smart woman. I recommend Earl Gentry. He's discreet and works fast. What about work? Naomi asked quietly. We all work for the same company. I smiled, but it wasn't a pleasant expression. That's the beauty of it, isn't it? You and Scott will get to figure out how to explain this to your colleagues, your boss, and HR. Should make for interesting conversations around the water cooler. You wouldn't, Scott said through the phone. Wouldn't what? Tell the truth? Share the evidence? Let people know what kind of people you really are? That would hurt everyone. Everyone's already hurt, Scott. The difference is that now the people who deserve to know the truth will know it. I ended the call and looked at the two women on my porch. Ladies, I think we all have a lot to do today. By noon, the story had reached every corner of Millbrook that mattered. I hadn't planned it that way, but small towns have their own physics when it comes to scandal. Information moves faster than light and with more force than gravity. It started at the Briar Patch Bar, where I stopped for lunch after spending the morning packing Naomi's belongings. Linda Kowalski and Big Tom Murphy were holding court at their usual spots at the bar, and when they saw me come in looking like I hadn't slept, they naturally inquired about my well-being. I didn't volunteer information. I simply answered their questions honestly. Everything okay at home, Daniel? Linda asked. She'd been the town's unofficial information broker for 15 years, ever since she retired from running the post office. Define okay, I replied, ordering a coffee and a sandwich. You look like you've been through the ringer. Found out some interesting things about my wife last night, and my best friend. Big Tom, who'd known me since I started working at the college, leaned closer. What kind of things? I pulled out my phone and showed them one of the hotel receipts. The kind of things that explain why Naomi's been working so many late nights lately. Linda's eyes went wide as she read the receipt. The Millbrook Inn, but that's where Scott Mercer was staying last night when he answered Naomi's phone at 2 a.m., I finished. The silence that followed was the kind you hear right before thunder. Scott Mercer? Big Tom repeated. Your buddy Scott? The one married to that sweet teacher? The very same. Holy hell, Daniel. What are you going to do? What I've already done. Changed the locks, packed her bags, and made sure Alison knows what her husband's been up to. Linda was already reaching for her phone. That poor woman, and those kids. I didn't try to stop her from making calls. In fact, I was counting on it. By the time I finished my sandwich, half the town would know that Daniel Farrow's marriage was over, and why. The other half would know by dinner time. My phone rang as I was paying my tab. The caller ID showed my supervisor at the college, Jim Bradley. Daniel, I just heard something disturbing. Is everything all right? Depends on what you heard. That your wife's been having an affair with Scott Mercer. Then you heard correctly. Jim sighed. I'm sorry, man, that's rough. Do you need some time off? Actually, I need to stay busy. Work helps. Understood. But if you need anything, you let me know. And Daniel, for what it's worth, anyone who knows you didn't deserve this. After hanging up, I drove home to find Allison's car in my driveway again. She was sitting on the porch steps, looking more composed than she had that morning, but still fragile around the edges. How are you holding up? I asked, sitting down beside her. I've been better. I called in sick to work. Couldn't face a classroom full of kids asking why Mrs. Mercer looked sad. Understandable. I also called a lawyer. Good for you. She was quiet for a moment, staring at her hands. Daniel, can I ask you something? Shoot. Are you angry? I considered the question. Furious, but not at you. I meant at them, at Scott and Naomi. Angry doesn't cover it. Angry is what you feel when someone cuts you off in traffic. This is something else entirely. What would you call it? I thought about the feeling that had been building in my chest since 2:01 a.m. It wasn't hot like anger or cold like betrayal. It was something more calculated, more purposeful. Determined, I said finally. Determined to do what? to make sure they understand that actions have consequences, that you can't treat people like garbage and expect to walk away clean. Alison nodded slowly. I keep thinking about all the lies, all the times he looked me in the eye and lied about where he'd been, what he'd done, who he'd seen. It makes me question everything. Don't do that to yourself. Question them, not yourself. How can you be so calm about this? Who says I'm calm? She looked at me more closely, and I saw recognition dawn in her eyes. You're planning something. I'm planning several things. Such as? I pulled out my phone and showed her a text message I'd composed but not yet sent. It was addressed to Scott and Naomi's supervisor at the tech company, a woman named Patricia Wells, who took a dim view of workplace drama. The message read, Patricia, I thought you should be aware that 2 of your employees, Scott Mercer and Naomi Farrow, have been conducting a personal relationship that may be affecting their professional judgment. I have documentation of meetings and communications that suggest they've been using company time and resources for personal matters. I'm happy to discuss this with you at your convenience. Daniel Farrow. You're going after their jobs? Alison asked. I'm providing information to their employer about potential misconduct. What their employer does with that information is up to them. That's actually brilliant. It's just the beginning. My phone buzzed with a text from Naomi. Daniel, please, we need to talk. This doesn't have to get ugly. I showed the message to Alison, who snorted. Doesn't have to get ugly? It's been ugly for 4 months. She's just upset that she got caught. I typed back, Nothing to discuss. Your belongings are on the porch. Please collect them at your convenience. Her response came immediately. What about our marriage? What about 15 years together? What about them? I replied. You threw them away for hotel room hookups with my best friend. It wasn't like that. It was exactly like that. My phone rang. Naomi calling. Don't answer it, Alison advised. Actually, I think I will. But you should hear this. I put the phone on speaker. What, Naomi? Daniel, please don't do this. Don't destroy my career over a mistake. A mistake? A 4-month affair is a mistake? It was wrong, I know that. But ruining my job won't fix anything. You're right. It won't fix anything. But it will make sure you face appropriate consequences for your choices. What do you want? What will it take for you to not send that message to Patricia? I looked at Alison, who was shaking her head vigorously. Nothing, I said. There's nothing you can offer me that would make me pretend this didn't happen. I'll quit. I'll find another job. You should probably start looking anyway. I don't think your current position is going to work out. Daniel, I'm begging you. The way I begged you to be honest with me when I asked if something was wrong, the way I begged you to tell me the truth when I said I felt like we were drifting apart. Silence. That's what I thought. Goodbye, Naomi. I hung up and immediately sent the message to Patricia Wells. Feel better? Alison asked. Getting there. We sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, watching the leaves fall from the oak tree in my front yard. October in Maine was beautiful, even when your life was falling apart. Daniel? Yeah? Thank you. For what? For telling me. For not letting me go on believing everything was fine while my husband was cheating on me. You would have done the same thing. I hope so. But I'm not sure I would have been as strategic about it. Strategy helps. Keeps you focused on the goal instead of getting lost in the emotions. And what's the goal? I smiled, and this time there was genuine satisfaction in it. To make sure that when this is all over, everyone in town knows exactly what kind of people Scott Mercer and Naomi Farrow really are. That seems fair. I think so. My phone buzzed again. This time it was Scott. Daniel, you're making a huge mistake. This is going to hurt everyone, including you. I showed the message to Alison. Want to respond to this one? She took my phone and typed, The only mistake was trusting you. Alison and Daniel. Perfect, I said as she hit send. I should probably get home. The kids will be back from school soon, and I need to figure out how to explain why Daddy won't be living with us anymore. If you need anything, a babysitter, someone to talk to, help with anything, just call. I will. And Daniel? Make them pay. Count on it. After Alison left, I spent the afternoon continuing my campaign of strategic information sharing. I called my brother-in-law, who worked in the same industry as Scott. I mentioned the situation to my neighbor, who happened to be married to the president of the school board where Alison worked. I stopped by the hardware store and the grocery store, places where people knew me and would naturally ask how I was doing. I didn't gossip. I didn't embellish. I simply told the truth when people asked questions. But the truth, as it turned out, was damaging enough. By evening, my phone was buzzing constantly with messages from friends, colleagues, and acquaintances expressing their shock and support. Several people mentioned that they'd never trusted Scott, that something had always seemed off about him. Others shared their own stories of betrayal and offered advice on lawyers, counselors, and moving forward. But the most satisfying message came from Patricia Wells. Daniel, thank you for bringing this to my attention. I'll be conducting interviews with both employees tomorrow morning. Your discretion in this matter is appreciated. I forwarded the message to Alison with a note. Phase 1, complete. She replied immediately. What's Phase 2? I looked around my house now, not ours, and considered the question. What was Phase 2? What came after the initial shock and revelation? What came after the professional consequences and the social fallout? Justice, I decided. Real, lasting, personal justice. I typed back, making sure they remember this lesson for the rest of their lives. Patricia Wells called me at 7:30 the next morning while I was drinking coffee and reading the documentation I'd prepared for her. She was a no-nonsense woman in her 50s who'd built the tech company from a small startup into a regional success story. She didn't tolerate drama, incompetence, or anything that reflected poorly on her organization. Daniel, I wanted to update you on yesterday's interviews. Both employees have been terminated, effective immediately. That was fast. When I have clear evidence of employees using company resources for personal affairs, including falsified expense reports and unauthorized use of company vehicles, I don't waste time deliberating. Company vehicles? Scott claimed several trips to Portland for client meetings that never happened. Gas and mileage reimbursements for personal travel. And Naomi approved his expense reports despite the obvious conflict of interest. I hadn't known about the expense fraud, but I wasn't surprised. Liars rarely limit themselves to one area of deception. What happens now? We're reviewing all their work for the past 6 months to determine if there are other irregularities. Depending on what we find, we may pursue legal action for reimbursement of fraudulent expenses. After Patricia hung up, I called Alison to share the news. She answered on the first ring. They're both fired, I told her. Good. Scott called me last night, crying about how sorry he was and how he'd made a terrible mistake. I hung up on him. Where's he staying? I have no idea, and I don't care. He's not my problem anymore. Speaking of problems, I had an interesting conversation with Earl Gentry this morning. Apparently Scott tried to hire him to change the locks at your house. What? Earl told him that you'd already hired him for that job and that he wasn't interested in helping a cheating husband break into his own home. I love that man. Earl's good people. He also mentioned that Scott seemed pretty desperate. Apparently, he's been trying to get into the house to collect some important documents. What kind of documents? Earl didn't know, but it got me thinking. What kind of documents would Scott be desperate to get that he couldn't just ask you for? Alison was quiet for a moment. The tax returns, and the financial records for his consulting business. What consulting business? He started doing freelance IT work about 6 months ago, said it was going to help us save for the kids' college funds, but now that I think about it, he was very secretive about it, kept all the paperwork in his home office, and never wanted to discuss the details. That's interesting timing. 6 months ago, right around when the affair started. You think they're connected? I think everything's connected. People don't usually compartmentalize their deceptions. If he's lying about one thing, he's probably lying about others. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that maybe you should take a very close look at those financial records before you hand them over to him. I wouldn't even know what to look for. I know someone who would. An hour later, I was sitting in the office of Mira Santos, a private investigator who'd helped the college track down some stolen equipment the previous year. Mira was a former state police detective who'd gone private after getting tired of bureaucracy and politics. She was sharp, thorough, and had a talent for finding things people preferred to keep hidden. "So you want me to investigate your best friend's finances," Mira said, reviewing the notes I'd given her. "Former best friend. And yes, I want to know if he's been hiding money from his wife. Any particular reason you suspect financial fraud?" I explained about the consulting business, the secretive behavior, and the desperation to retrieve documents from the house. "It's possible he's just embarrassed about how little money he's made," Mira pointed out. "A lot of men inflate their business success to their wives." "Maybe, but I'd like to know for sure." "This isn't cheap, Daniel. Are you sure you want to spend money investigating someone else's marriage?" "Allison's not someone else. She's been a good friend to me for years, and she's got 2 kids to think about. If Scott's been hiding assets or income, she needs to know before the divorce proceedings start." Mira nodded. "Fair enough. I'll need access to his office and his computer. Allison can arrange that. And I'll need a few days to run background checks and financial searches. Take all the time you need. What about your own situation? Are you planning to pursue divorce proceedings?" "Already started. Filed the paperwork yesterday morning. Fast work. No point in dragging it out. The marriage is over. Now it's just a matter of dividing assets and moving on." "Any complications there? Shared property, debts, that kind of thing?" "The house is in my name only. We have some shared credit card debt, but nothing major. No kids, thank God." "That makes it easier. The only thing I want from Naomi is for her to stay out of my life completely." "And what about Scott? What do you want from him?" I considered the question. What did I want from Scott Mercer, the man who'd been my best friend for 20 years before he decided to betray me in the most personal way possible? "I want him to understand that actions have consequences," I said finally. "I want him to lose everything he cared about more than his friendship with me and his marriage to Alison. Revenge can be expensive, Daniel. So can letting people walk all over you." Mira smiled. "I like you. You're practical about your anger. Is that a good thing?" "It's an effective thing." That afternoon I met Alison at her house to help her go through Scott's office. The room was a mess of papers, computer equipment, and half-finished projects. But hidden in the back of the filing cabinet, we found what we were looking for, a folder labeled MSM Consulting that contained contracts, invoices, and bank statements. "MSM?" I asked. "Mercer Strategic Management. That's what he called his consulting business." I flipped through the documents while Alison organized them for Mira. What I found was interesting. Scott had been billing clients for significantly more work than he'd reported to Alison. According to the bank statements, MSM Consulting had earned over $40,000 in the past 6 months. According to what he'd told his wife, the business had barely broken even. "Alison, look at this." She reviewed the bank statements, her face growing darker with each page. "He told me he'd only made about $5,000 total. He said the business was struggling, and that's why he picked up extra hours at the regular job." Extra hours that he was actually spending with my wife. This is unbelievable. What was he planning to do with all this money? "I have a theory about that." I showed her a hotel receipt I'd found in the folder. The Portland Harbor Hotel, the same place where Scott and Naomi had been spending their romantic getaways. But this receipt was different. It wasn't for a single night. It was for a week-long reservation in December, with a note attached, "Honeymoon Suite, Special request for champagne and flowers. Alison stared at the receipt for a long moment. December. He was planning to leave me in December. Looks that way. The honeymoon suite. They were going to get married. After the divorces were final, presumably. And he was hiding money to pay for it. To pay for his new life with your wife. I felt that familiar surge of cold determination. Not anymore. He isn't. What do you mean? I mean that hidden money is a marital asset, and those consulting contracts were signed while he was married to you. Depending on Maine law, you might be entitled to half of everything MSM Consulting earned. Really? Really? And if he was planning to use marital assets to fund an affair and a future marriage to another woman, that's going to look very bad in divorce court. Alison smiled for the first time since this whole mess started. You know what? I think I'm going to enjoy watching him explain this to a judge. I think you should. And I think you should make sure Naomi knows that her dream honeymoon just became evidence in a divorce proceeding. How do we do that? I pulled out my phone and took a picture of the hotel reservation. Then I sent it to Naomi with a message. Found this in Scott's files. Looks like you two had big plans. Too bad about the timing. Her response came within minutes. Where did you get that? Does it matter? That's private property. Actually, it's marital property, and Alison's lawyer is very interested in seeing the rest of Scott's financial records. You can't do this. Watch me. I showed the exchange to Alison, who was gathering the last of the financial documents. She sounds worried, Alison observed. She should be. If Scott was hiding money from you, there's a good chance he was hiding it from the IRS too. What do you mean? I mean that $40,000 in consulting income should have been reported on his tax returns. If it wasn't, that's tax fraud. And if Naomi knew about the money and helped him hide it, she could be considered an accessory. Alison's smile grew wider. Daniel, you're a genius. No, I'm just thorough. And I'm very motivated. What's next? Next, we give all of this to Mira and let her dig deeper. Then we give copies to your lawyer and let him decide how to use it in the divorce proceedings. And then? And then we sit back and watch Scott and Naomi try to explain to their lawyers, the IRS, and anyone else who's interested why they thought they could steal money, cheat on their spouses, and plan a future together without facing any consequences. I love this plan. I thought you might. As we loaded the boxes of documents into my truck, I felt a sense of satisfaction that was deeper and more lasting than simple anger. This wasn't about revenge anymore. This was about justice. This was about making sure that people who chose to hurt others faced appropriate consequences for their choices. And we were just getting started. Mira Santos called me 3 days later with news that exceeded my expectations. I was at the college, replacing a broken water heater in the science building, when my phone rang. Daniel, you need to sit down for this. I'm in a basement with a wrench in my hand. Sitting isn't really an option. Then brace yourself. Your friend Scott has been very busy, and not just with your wife. What did you find? For starters, that consulting business, it's not just unreported income. He's been running a sophisticated tax fraud scheme. Fake business expenses, inflated deductions, the works. I estimate he's avoided paying about $12,000 in federal and state taxes over the past 2 years. That's felony territory. It gets worse. 3 of his consulting contracts are with companies that don't exist. Shell corporations with fake addresses and no actual business operations. Money laundering? That's what it looks like. Someone's been paying Scott to clean money through his consulting business, and he's been taking a percentage as his fee. I set down my wrench and leaned against the wall. How much money are we talking about? Over the past year, about $200,000 has flowed through MSM Consulting. Scott kept 20% as his fee, which explains where that $40,000 came from. Do you know who's behind the shell corporations? Still working on that, but I have some leads. The interesting thing is that the payments started about a month after Scott began working at the tech company. Someone there either recruited him or gave him access to information he needed. Someone like Naomi. That would be my guess. She's in HR, which means she has access to employee financial information, social security numbers, personal details that would be useful for setting up fake identities. I felt that cold determination crystallizing into something harder and more focused. Mira, I need you to document everything. Every transaction, every fake company, every piece of evidence you can find. Already on it. But Daniel, you need to understand what you're dealing with here. If Scott and Naomi have been involved in money laundering, there are other people involved. People who won't be happy about having their operation exposed. Are you saying it's dangerous? I'm saying it's complicated, and you need to decide how far you want to take this. How far can we take it? With what I've found so far, federal charges for tax evasion and money laundering, prison time for both of them, if the prosecutors decide to pursue it. What would you recommend? Honestly, turn everything over to the FBI and let them handle it. This is way beyond a simple divorce case. But if you want to handle it privately first, there are ways to use this information to your advantage. Such as making sure Scott and Naomi understand that their freedom depends on their cooperation with your demands. I thought about that while I finished the water heater installation. By the time I was done, I'd made my decision. Mira, I want you to prepare 2 packages. One for the FBI with everything you found. The other for me, with just enough information to make Scott and Naomi understand how much trouble they're in. What are you planning? A conversation, a very frank conversation about consequences and choices. Be careful, Daniel. Desperate people do stupid things. I'm counting on it. That evening, I called Alison and asked her to meet me at the Briar Patch Bar. I wanted to update her on Mira's findings, but I also wanted witnesses to our conversation. In a small town, the bar served as an informal courthouse where reputations were made and destroyed. Alison arrived looking better than she had in days. She'd gotten her hair cut and was wearing a dress I hadn't seen before. The kids were staying with her sister for the weekend, giving her a chance to process everything without worrying about explaining adult problems to 8- and 6-year-olds. You look good, I told her as she sat down. I feel good. For the first time in months, I feel like I can breathe. Even with everything that's happening? Especially with everything that's happening. I'm not the one who cheated, lied, and apparently committed federal crimes. I'm just the victim who's finally fighting back. I ordered us both drinks and filled her in on Mira's discoveries. With each revelation, Alison's expression shifted from surprise to anger to something that looked like grim satisfaction. Money laundering, she repeated. My husband is a criminal. Your soon-to-be ex-husband. How long do you think he's been doing this? According to Mira, it started about 6 months ago, right around the time the affair began. So Naomi was involved from the beginning. Looks that way. She probably helped him set up the fake identities, maybe even recruited him for whoever's running the operation. Which means she's just as guilty as he is. More guilty in some ways. Scott's an idiot who got in over his head. Naomi's smart enough to understand exactly what they were doing. Alison took a long sip of her wine. What happens now? Now we decide how to use this information. What do you mean? I mean we have enough evidence to send them both to prison. The question is whether we want to do that or whether we want to use the threat of prison to get something else. Such as a complete admission of guilt, public apologies, and agreements to stay out of our lives forever, plus full financial disclosure and restitution for any money they stole or hid. And if they refuse? Then we turn everything over to the FBI and let them spend the next few years in federal court. Alison considered this while Linda Kowalski and Big Tom Murphy pretended not to listen from their seats at the bar. In reality, I knew they were absorbing every word, which was exactly what I wanted. I like the idea of public apologies, Alison said finally. I thought you might. What kind of public? I was thinking the town Facebook group, maybe a letter to the editor of the local paper, something that makes sure everyone knows exactly what they did and how sorry they are. That's brilliant. It's also just the beginning. I pulled out my phone and showed her a message I'd composed but not yet sent. It was addressed to both Scott and Naomi. We need to meet tonight, all four of us. The Millbrook Inn, room 237, 9 p.m. Come alone and come ready to discuss your future. The alternative is a conversation with federal investigators. Room 237? Alison asked. The same room they used for their romantic getaways. I thought it was appropriate. How did you get access to a hotel room? I booked it for the night. Told the desk clerk I was planning a surprise for my wife. That's either brilliant or crazy. Maybe both. I sent the message and immediately received replies from both Scott and Naomi. Scott's response was panicked. What are you talking about? What federal investigators? Naomi's was more measured. This is harassment, Daniel. I'm calling the police. I replied to both. Call whoever you want, but if you're not in that room at 9 p.m., the FBI gets a very interesting package of documents tomorrow morning. You think they'll show up? Alison asked. They'll show up. They don't have a choice. What if they try to run? Run where? Mira's been monitoring their finances. Scott's consulting accounts have been frozen pending investigation, and Naomi's been fired from the only job she's had in 10 years. They don't have the resources to disappear. And if they try to call your bluff? It's not a bluff. I have the FBI package ready to go. One phone call and this becomes a federal case. Alison finished her wine and stood up. I want to be there. Are you sure? I'm sure. I want to look Scott in the eye when he realizes that his lies have finally caught up with him. It might get ugly. It's already ugly. At least this way, we control how ugly it gets. At 8:45 p.m., Alison and I were sitting in room 237 of the Millbrook Inn, waiting for Scott and Naomi to arrive. I'd brought copies of all the financial documents, the fake consulting contracts, and a summary of Mira's findings. Everything was laid out on the small table by the window, creating an impressive display of evidence. Nervous? I asked Alison. Terrified, she admitted, but also excited. Is that weird? Not at all. You're about to get answers to questions that have been eating at you for months. And justice. And justice. At exactly 9 p.m., there was a knock on the door. I opened it to find Scott and Naomi standing in the hallway, both looking like they'd aged years in the past week. Scott was unshaven and wearing clothes that looked like he'd slept in them. Naomi was perfectly put together, but there were dark circles under her eyes that makeup couldn't hide. Come in, I said, stepping aside. They entered the room and stopped short when they saw the documents spread across the table. Hello, Scott, Alison said calmly. Hello, Naomi. Please have a seat. We have a lot to discuss. Scott's eyes went wide as he recognized some of the papers. Where did you get those? From your home office, Alison replied. You know, the office in the house that I own half of and that you abandoned when you decided to shack up with someone else's wife. You had no right. I had every right. I also had an obligation to understand our financial situation before filing for divorce. Naomi had gone pale. Daniel, whatever you think you found, I think I found evidence of tax evasion, money laundering, and fraud, I interrupted. But I'm not the one who found it. That was Mira Santos, a private investigator and former state police detective who specializes in financial crimes. This is ridiculous, Scott said, but his voice lacked conviction. Is it? I picked up one of the fake consulting contracts. Tell me, Scott, what services did you provide to Apex Holdings LLC? Because according to the Delaware Department of Corporations, Apex Holdings doesn't exist. Scott sat down heavily in one of the chairs. I can explain. I'm sure you can. But the question is whether your explanation will satisfy a federal prosecutor. Naomi finally found her voice. What do you want? Now we're getting somewhere, I said, sitting down across from them. What we want is very simple. We want the truth, we want public acknowledgement of what you've done, and we want assurance that you'll never darken our doorsteps again. And if we refuse? Scott asked. I pulled out my phone and showed them a contact entry for FBI Special Agent Sarah Chen. Then I make a phone call, and this becomes a federal investigation. Tax evasion and money laundering carry sentences of up to 20 years in federal prison. The room fell silent except for the hum of the heating unit and the distant sound of traffic on Route 11. What kind of public acknowledgement? Naomi asked quietly. The kind that makes sure everyone in town knows exactly what you did and how sorry you are about it, Alison replied. And then what? We just disappear? You find new jobs in new towns and you build new lives, I said. Away from here, away from us, away from the mess you've made. Scott looked at Naomi, then back at me. And if we do what you want, the FBI never hears about this? That depends on how convincing your apologies are and how quickly you disappear. We need time to think about this. You have until tomorrow morning, I said, standing up. After that, the decision gets made for you. As they left the hotel room, I heard Scott whisper to Naomi, "How did this get so out of control?" Her response was too quiet to hear, but I could guess what she was thinking. The same thing I'd been thinking for the past week, that actions have consequences, and sometimes those consequences are more severe than you ever imagined. The reckoning was almost complete. The next morning brought the first real snowfall of the season, covering Millbrook in a blanket of white that made everything look clean and new. I was drinking coffee and watching the flakes fall when my phone buzzed with a text from Scott. "We'll do it, whatever you want. Just don't call the FBI." I forwarded the message to Alison, who replied immediately, "Good. I have some ideas about those public apologies." An hour later, we were sitting in my living room, drafting the terms of Scott and Naomi's surrender. Alison had brought a legal pad and was taking notes while I outlined what we wanted. First, complete financial disclosure, I said. Every account, every asset, every penny they've hidden or stolen. Second, full confession of the affair and the financial crimes, Alison added, in writing, signed and notarized. Third, public apologies. Facebook, the local paper, anywhere else we think is appropriate. Fourth, immediate departure from Millbrook. They have 1 week to pack up and leave. And fifth, no contact with either of us ever again. No calls, no texts, no showing up at our homes or workplaces. What about enforcement? Alison asked. How do we make sure they stick to the agreement? We keep copies of all the evidence. If they violate any part of the agreement, we turn everything over to the FBI immediately. That works for me. I typed up the agreement on my laptop, printed 2 copies, and called Scott. Meet us at the bank in 1 hour. Bring Naomi and bring your checkbooks. The bank? We're going to need a notary for the documents you're about to sign, and we're going to need access to your accounts to verify the financial disclosure. Daniel, please. 1 hour, Scott. Don't be late. At the Millbrook Savings and Trust, we commandeered a conference room normally used for loan applications. Scott and Naomi arrived looking like prisoners being led to execution, which wasn't far from the truth. The bank manager, a woman named Carol, who'd known me since I opened my first account, served as our notary. She didn't ask questions about why we needed 4 people to witness the signing of what appeared to be a separation agreement, but I could see the curiosity in her eyes. Before we begin, I said, I need to see complete financial statements for both of you. Bank accounts, credit cards, investment accounts, everything. Scott pulled out a folder thick with bank statements and account summaries. This is everything. I reviewed the documents while Alison read over my shoulder. What I found confirmed Mira's investigation. Scott had been funneling money through multiple accounts, trying to hide his consulting income from both the IRS and his wife. What about this account? I asked, pointing to a statement for an account I didn't recognize. That's the money I was saving. Saving for what? Scott glanced at Naomi, then back at me. For after the divorces. For when we could be together. $47,000, Alison read from the statement. You stole $47,000 from our marriage to fund your affair. I earned that money. You earned it while married to me, using resources and time that belonged to our family. And you hid it from me while I worried about paying for the kids' school supplies. Naomi spoke for the first time since arriving. We didn't mean for it to happen this way. How did you mean for it to happen? I asked. What was the plan? We were going to wait until after the holidays. Tell you both that we'd fallen in love and wanted to be together. We thought if we did it gently, it wouldn't hurt as much. Gently? Alison's voice rose. You call 4 months of lies and deception gentle? We were trying to protect you. You were trying to protect yourselves, I corrected. You wanted to have your affair and avoid the consequences. I slid the agreement across the table. Read this carefully. Once you sign it, there's no going back. Scott picked up the document and began reading aloud. We, Scott Mercer and Naomi Farrow, hereby acknowledge that we conducted an extramarital affair from June 2023 through October 2023, during which time we deceived our respective spouses and engaged in financial fraud. Financial fraud? Naomi interrupted. The consulting business, the hidden accounts, the fake expense reports, I explained. It's all fraud. We also acknowledge, Scott continued reading, that we used marital assets to fund said affair, including hotel stays, restaurant meals, and travel expenses totaling approximately $12,000. $12,000? Alison asked. That's just what we could document, I said. The actual amount is probably higher. We further agree to make full restitution to the injured parties, including repayment of all misappropriated funds and compensation for legal expenses. How much compensation? Naomi asked. $25,000 each, I said. $50,000 total. We don't have that kind of money. You have $47,000 in the secret account, plus whatever other assets you've been hiding. And if that's not enough, you'll have to figure out payment plans. Scott finished reading the agreement, which included the requirements for public apologies and permanent departure from Millbrook. This is everything we have. If we sign this, we'll have nothing left. You should have thought of that before you decided to betray the people who trusted you, Alison said. What guarantee do we have that you won't turn us in anyway? Naomi asked. You have my word, I replied, which, unlike yours, actually means something. They signed the documents. Carol notarized them. We made copies for everyone. The public apologies need to be posted by tomorrow, I said as we prepared to leave, and you have 1 week to be out of town. Where are we supposed to go? Scott asked. That's not my problem. What about my kids? He asked Alison. When will I see them again? When you've proven that you can be trusted to keep your word. When you've shown that you can put their needs ahead of your own desires. Maybe in a year or 2, we can discuss supervised visitation. Alison, please. You made your choice, Scott. You chose her over them. Now you get to live with that choice. That evening, I was home alone for the first time in a week, sitting in my living room and watching the snow continue to fall. My phone buzzed with notifications as Scott and Naomi's Facebook apologies went live, generating dozens of comments and shares from people who couldn't believe what they were reading. Scott's post was simple and direct. I want to publicly apologize to my wife Alison and my children for my inexcusable behavior over the past several months. I had an affair with Naomi Farrow and lied repeatedly to cover it up. I also engaged in financial deception that hurt my family. Alison deserves better than what I gave her, and my children deserve a father they can be proud of. I am leaving Millbrook to get help, and to try to become a better person. I hope someday they can forgive me, but I understand if they can't. Naomi's post was longer and more detailed. I owe a public apology to Daniel Farrow, Alison Mercer, and the entire Millbrook community for my actions over the past 4 months. I had an affair with Scott Mercer, deceived my husband repeatedly, and participated in financial schemes that were both unethical and illegal. I betrayed the trust of someone who loved me and supported me for 15 years. I hurt innocent children and destroyed friendships that meant everything to me. There is no excuse for what I did. I am leaving town and leaving Daniel free to build a life without the pain I've caused him. He deserves happiness, and I hope he finds it. The comments were brutal. People I'd known for years expressing their shock and disappointment, their support for Alison and me, their disgust at Scott and Naomi's behavior. Within hours, the posts had been shared hundreds of times, ensuring that everyone in our extended community would know exactly what had happened. My phone rang. It was Alison. "Have you seen the Facebook posts?" she asked. "Just finished reading them. How do you feel?" I considered the question. How did I feel? Satisfied, certainly. Vindicated. But also something else, something I hadn't expected. "Free," I said finally. "I feel free." "Me too. For the first time in months, I feel like I can move forward instead of just surviving." "What's next for you?" "The kids and I are going to stay with my sister in Boston for Thanksgiving. Give ourselves a chance to heal away from all the gossip and drama. What about you?" "I'm going to finish the renovations on the house, make it completely mine, maybe take that vacation I've been putting off for years." "You should. You've earned it." We both have. After hanging up, I walked through my house. My house now, truly and completely mine. In the kitchen, I opened a bottle of wine I'd been saving for a special occasion. In the living room, I built a fire in the fireplace that Naomi had always complained was too much work to maintain. In my workshop, I began planning projects that I'd put on hold while trying to save a marriage that was already over. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering the old wounds and preparing the ground for whatever came next. Tomorrow, Scott and Naomi would begin the process of packing up their lives and leaving Millbrook forever. Next week, I would file the final divorce papers and officially close the book on 15 years of marriage. But tonight, I was content to sit by my fire, drink my wine, and enjoy the silence of a house that was finally at peace. The locks had clicked twice, once to keep out the people who had betrayed me, and once to secure the life I was building without them. Both times, they had clicked with the sound of justice being served and consequences being faced. It was enough.